Fantastic. All right. So after that incomparable talk, boy, our next speaker, sorry, I hope you have disco balls in there, is John Newman, who's a project officer with the New South Wales Institute of Trauma and Injury Management. And his work involves improving the trauma system by leading statewide innovation projects. So without further ado, we're going to hear from our colleagues in Australia. Take it away.
Thanks for that introduction. Just one disclosure. I'm presenting on a piece of work when I was working with New South Wales Ambulance. I'm now employed with the Agency for Clinical Innovation. And also a warning, there is some graphic content in a slide or two, but I don't see that being a problem for most of you guys. All right, I want to begin by telling you a story. A true story that profoundly impacted me. And to this day, I don't quite understand why, but I believe it was the genesis of the RTP, or the Retrieval Transfusion Procedure. In the summer of 2014, when I was working at the Aeromedical Control Centre, which is like the central hub that coordinates all aeromedical and retrieval services in New South Wales, a call came through. It was a middle-aged man who had come off his motorbike in central western New South Wales. He went to avoid a kangaroo at high speed and hit a tree. He was taken to the local hospital with multiple severe injuries and clearly bleeding from compressible and non-compressible sources. We tasked a team soon after, whilst the local staff at the hospital tried to maintain his blood pressure. They ended up giving 9 litres of crystalloid. Now, that wasn't their fault. They had nothing else. They had no blood products. Tragically, he went into cardiac arrest and he died. It was about an hour after he died when the aeromedical team arrived. He basically bled to death. Now, what equally impacted me about this case were some of my colleagues' reactions. They would say, you know, you live in the bush, you take the risk. It's just the consequence of, you know, what their decision. Or, you know, they'd also say, there's nothing more we could have done. We did our best. And in one sense, I sort of don't blame them, because we did do our best under the system that we're operating under. Unfortunately, this was a reoccurring narrative, and it wasn't just tolerated, but it was accepted. And clearly, if anything was going to change, the system would have to change. And we had to work towards equitable access to blood in these circumstances for our rural cousins, and especially our First Nations people. Now, interestingly, there was a parliamentary inquiry about 6 years after, into rural health, 6 years after this tragedy, and it confirmed that our observations that there was not equitable access to blood for our rural folk. So this is the first of 2 talks on the RTP. The RTP is a delivery system, a system whereby blood is provided to critically bleeding patients throughout New South Wales, and usually in austere environments. And you may ask, well, why is a delivery system so important? I guess in response to that, in short, that no matter how good your science is, if you don't actually have a system to deliver that science safely at the right time and the right place, it's going to be less effective or not effective at all because of our patients' deteriorating state. Now, we all, I guess, depend on delivery systems, don't we? Even if it's our local MTP. And we know how hard it is to achieve a true balanced ratio of products. Now, the RTP is a very different and sophisticated delivery system. So if you're passionate about remote damage control resuscitation, I'd like to share with you in the next couple of minutes our experience with the RTP. in specific, what inspired it, how we designed it, some key architectures of it, and whether or not it's making any difference at all. Now, if you think of Australia, especially our overseas visitors, and welcome by the way, you think about the animals that could potentially hurt or kill you, and Australia is a dangerous place. If you have a look at the left-hand bottom corner, that's a red-bellied black snake that I took a photo outside my bedroom. But I want to challenge you. I want to challenge you today to consider that when you're bleeding and you're critically unwell in remote rural New South Wales and many parts of Australia, the big dangers are distance and time. The time it actually takes to get you to definitive care and the ongoing resuscitation required to get you there. Time and distance, I would argue, are equally dangerous in this context. This is just a heat map of New South Wales, and it demonstrates how long a transfer takes to get to a level 1 trauma centre for patients with major trauma or an ISS greater than 12. If you have a look around the Sydney Basin area, it will take you, between 0 and 2 hours. But the further west you go, the longer it takes. And so if you are at a place called Burke out west, it can be taking 10 hours, sometimes more, from point of injury. And we know that long response times can contribute to 20% of preventable or potentially preventable deaths. So this is a real challenge for us. A few of us were not content with the status quo, and we agreed that we should do more for our rural patients. I don't think we realised it at the time, but agreeing that we should do more and being committed to system change was the tipping point that would usher in the RTP. But what was the solution? Well, to understand your solution, you really got to understand your problem. And I just want to press pause for a second, just to say that it's really important when you get to this juncture with any quality improvement project, you need to invest your time in diagnosing your problem, even if it looks really obvious. And this was a critical time for us. I'd also say be careful of well-meaning people who have solutions looking for a problem. They could actually send you on the wrong trajectory. Listen to them, but be warned. But what we did know was that there was a small subset of patients in rural hospitals, usually that didn't actually have blood products, who would benefit from early resuscitation with blood products before our medical teams arrive. In fact, it was our observation that some patients would die before our teams arrived, so there was more to be done in that space. There was also a small subset of patients that would require more blood products than what our medical teams carried. So our basic question was, how do we sustain life until we could actually turn the tap off? And it really did come down to a supply and demand issue. Our hypothesis was that if we could keep up with the demand for blood products and deliver the patient with a pulse to damage control surgery or interventional radiology, we'd give the patient the best chance of survival. Now, this wasn't an endpoint, it was just a way of keeping the patient alive until we could get the patient to definitive care. So how do we gain blood products and how do we bridge this gap? We knew that establishing new blood banks in these small hospitals and routinely adding more blood products to our HEMS teams for various reasons was not viable or within our remit. And it seems like the potential solution was probably under our noses all the time. This is a map of New South Wales with all the hospitals that have blood products. And we thought, well, maybe we could actually tap into this supply. So if we potentially could tap into this supply, there are a number of questions we needed to address. How are we going to convince the blood bankers to hand over their blood products? If we had access to this blood, how would we coordinate this process and coordinate it in a way that wouldn't delay definitive care? And if we're going to coordinate this process, we would need access to information information in terms of location of blood banks, many other areas in relation to blood banks, and I'll talk about that in a moment, and support decision-making sort of tools. There are many other issues to address in terms of safety, cold chain, wastage governance, transparency, and many more. I just want to talk, because of the limits of time, I just want to talk a little bit more about these 3 points. So convincing blood banks to hand over their products. And to be honest, blood bankers were really concerned, and their number one question to us, or concern that they expressed to us, was what about the demands for our patients in hospital? You know, like if we took half the supply of blood products from a hospital, what would happen to that that patient if they needed it? Look, and the way that we addressed it was to gently and respectfully explain to them that the patient, 30, 50, 60 kilometres down the road in their district was as much their patient as their patient in the hospital. And so this was a bit of a paradigm shift for these guys, but they did come around. But to roll this out as a statewide process, you need to really be connected to the right people. And enablers like Doug Lenton and Mark Dean, are both haematologists, were vital in this. So Doug Lenton, who's a haematologist in Orange, New South Wales, he was really important in terms of the early development of the RTP. Mark Dean, the chair of the New South Wales transfusion stream, was able to develop with the blood bankers a procedure that basically mirrored the one that we were creating at the same time to mandate the RTP for all New South Wales blood banks. And without these guys, nothing would have happened. Okay, so our initial goal was to really address the rural and remote inter-hospital space, and that was going pretty well. Around the same time, we were working with the Royal Flying Doctors at Dubbo, at the Dubbo base, to get blood onto their aircraft. And we also arranged their MTP pack to come out from Dubbo Blood Bank on demand. And then the first pre-hospital RTP occurred. And this seriously disrupted my project plan. So the story was that it was a young lady who unfortunately had a motor vehicle accident, and she was hemodynamically very unstable with critical bleeding. This was north of Dubbo, so we sent a helicopter out, and the medical team was literally running out of blood. And the state retrieval consultant at the Aeromedical Control Centre was giving some remote advice and support for the crew. And then he sort of had this thought that, he remembered that I'd sent an email around saying that MTP pack was available for the RFDS at Dubbo, and it just so happened that this helicopter needed to do a hot refuel at Dubbo to get to a level 1 trauma centre in Sydney. And so they thought, well, why don't we arrange this MTP pack to come out? And they did that, and it worked really well. And she received all the products in that pack. Now, this was a sort of a proof of concept for pre-hospital RTP, and so you can imagine we had to play a lot of catch up in terms of design of framework and governance around this new sort of process. It was all very fast moving, completely out of scope, but exciting at the same time. Okay, so if we're going to get access to blood from these blood banks, how are we going to coordinate this? So we decided the best way to do this was to centralise this process. So it was all going to be coordinated through the Aeromedical Control Centre in Sydney. In fact, we didn't want our medical teams to get involved in any of the logistics. We said, you guys stay with the patient, be focused on the patient. So we needed to define our roles in the Aeromedical Control Centre, and we had to play to our strengths and our skill set. Communication was really vital. So the medical teams need to communicate to the Aeromedical Control Centre staff we designed the clot handover tool, and that's a really important tool that's used, continues to be used. The Aeromedical Control Centre needed to communicate really well to the blood banks to give them the information they required. We've got this pre-formatted fax. Yes, we're still using faxes. I just can't believe we're doing that. We needed to communicate really well to different agencies like New South Wales Police, who would actually bring the products from the blood bank out to wherever was needed. And we need to communicate really well to each other. And so you can understand there's a lot of human factors involved in all this. There was a degree of agility that was required because every case was going to be different with a whole lot of different circumstances and variables. And we needed to define the different ways we could deliver blood to our teams. And this was always under the pump. So this is just a diagram. Don't get too confused with it. It's a diagram describing the RTP process. Just want you to focus on the left-hand side where the coordination occurs. So when a request comes through for an RTP, it usually goes to the logistics people first. And these are the guys who organise and coordinates all the logistics. This is a really logistics-heavy process. They would then escalate it up to the state retrieval consultant. The state retrieval consultant is the one who authorises the activation and decides on the type and the amount of blood products required, and in consultation with the medical teams. And then the clinical coordinator, who's the critical care nurse there, usually makes contact with the blood bank and does that request. All this is sort of working concurrently. It looks like it's linear, but it's not. And it's all hands on deck. It's really labour intensive and really, really busy when it's happening. So there's a number of ways we can deliver blood to our teams, and I did talk about the inter-hospital and also hot refuelling, but we can also bring products out to the pre-hospital scene. So that might be someone who's, has a prolonged extrication, stuck in a car, who's got critical bleeding. We can also do what's called a hot pickup. That sounds a bit sus, doesn't it? But where a helicopter, it's decided that they'll land on a helipad at a hospital that has products, and occasionally we might do what's called a rendezvous if that's a land-based thing. But the majority of RTPs, interestingly, are now pre-hospital, not inter-hospital. Okay, for the RTP to work, it requires rapid and critical information, and the iTrack database was developed to provide this information. iTrack is a geospatial web-based tool developed in partnership with New South Wales Ambulance, the Agency for Clinical Innovation, and the data provided by New South Wales Health Pathology. And it provides information on the location of the hospitals that have blood products in relation to where the patient is, and it's got stock levels and direct phone numbers of those hospitals. And it also gives you a way of calculating transport times. And this is really important because you need to assess whether or not there's a delivery window, if a delivery window in fact exists. So the best way to describe and show you how iTrack works is through a case. So I want to introduce you to 15-year-old Kyle, and he was accidentally shot in a place called Safala, which is in central western New South Wales, middle of nowhere basically, in the bush. He was critical. He was bleeding to death, and the medical team had sort of exhausted most of their blood supply very early in the piece. And look, you can see his little sister and dad being comforted by the police, having to face the real prospect of the unimaginable grief and loss in their little family. I can't imagine what they'd be feeling. So this is how iTrack works. Okay, so what you do is you geolocate the location of the patient. That drops a pin, and then you press a filter, and you can do what's called a blood proximity search, and you can see it's captured all the hospitals that actually have blood products, and you can sort of see what they have there. Bathurst Hospital was the closest, and you can sort of see direct phone numbers to the blood banks and their stock levels. And then what you can do is actually work out, what is the ETA for 3 different modalities, and that just helps you understand what to do, whether or not that delivery window exists. The other thing is that what we did is, in this case, is find a major paediatric trauma centre, and you can sort of see that the closest centre was Westmead Children's Hospital, which is where he went, and that was a 35-minute flight using the AW139, which is most retrieval services now use that helicopter. So this is Carl being loaded into the helicopter, and I just want you guys to have a look at where the arrow is. That's the 2 blood packs that actually came out, and one of them's already been cracked open, and he received most of those units. So he received 18 units before he even touched the hospital, and that's not the record. So Carl did well. He had a bit of a rough time. It still looks like he's having a rough time with all those nurses around him. But he survived and continued to finish his schooling. So have we made a difference for our rural folk? So you can sort of just see this map here of New South Wales. So there's been 400 activations since the inception of the RTP. 80% have been in rural locations, and so that translates to hundreds of patients in the bush who have received blood who wouldn't have otherwise. We have activated the RTP from 60 different blood banks, providing patients with a range of products, including, apart from red cells, FFP, cryoplatelets, freeze-dried fibrinogen concentrate, and prothrombin complex. This is just a couple of real cases where patients actually have received the RTP, and I just want to show you. Oh no, don't go that way. Go that way. I'm just trying. Anyway, the right-hand slide, you can sort of see there's a guy trapped in a car, and he's been speared by the guardrail that he rode into, and he had a prolonged extrication of about 3.5 hours. So they had to cut the car out from him rather than the other way around. Okay, so when we evaluated the first 5 years, we know that 77% of patients had an improvement in their shock index in relation to their first and their final observations. But I do think that we need to do some deeper dives in terms of further research on outcomes in a few other areas. Why has this worked? Well, there's many reasons, but a process like this does take a village. Look, there are many moving parts and many stakeholders involved, and everyone had a part to play. Healthcare systems have a bad reputation, but a well-deserved reputation for working in silos. Silos are good for grain, but not good for healthcare systems. And I think the RTP is an example of what can be done when we don't work in silos and we're focused on the patient. This is just some of the village or the team. I want to make a special mention of Tony Grenfell. He's in the top right-hand corner beside the helicopter. He was a senior transfusion scientist from Liverpool Hospital who tragically died a couple of years ago. I remember Tony as being a really amazing guy. He was calm, considered, progressive thinker, and so supportive of this process. And I do remember that he was the one who really pushed for the term RTP, so I credit to him. And because of Tony and the rest of the team, there are many patients alive today. We would call them unexpected survivors. Thanks for listening.